Hi guys, in this module we will be discussing about Azure Virtual Network. If your company is migrating to Azure, they want to replicate their on-prem network in the cloud, and for that reason you should be familiar with Azure Virtual Network and its terminologies. We will also discuss how can we create and manage virtual network infrastructure over cloud. We can create new virtual networks anytime, and we can also add virtual networks when we create the virtual machine. Either way, we will need to define the address space and at least one subnet. So while creating virtual network, we have to specify the subscription it belongs to, the resource group which will contain this virtual network, the name for this virtual network, and region. So these are the required fields that we need to fill while creating the virtual network, and after this you can click on review and create. In this tab, an IP addresses tab, we can define what address space we want to use. By default we have some limit of creating virtual network. Let's see that in portal what limits do we have for creating virtual network. As you can see, I have logged into my portal. Here we can see in our subscription. Let me see for my MSDN platform subscription, what how many virtual networks can we create. So we can go to usage and quotas, and here we can verify the virtual networks number we can create. So I'll just filter it with virtual network, and you can see per region I can create like thousands of virtual network in central India, thousands of virtual network in north central US. Similarly, you can go through the list. Before going to the portal and creating virtual networks, let's get ourselves acquainted with the types of IP addresses we'll get in Azure. We'll be getting two type of IP addresses: private IP addresses and public IP addresses. So public IP addresses, we will be using public IP addresses for internet facing and public facing servers, and for we will be using private IP addresses within our VNets, and we can even use private IP addresses to connect our on-prem network. Now that you know what IP addresses, what are the types of IP addresses we'll be getting in Azure, let's see how can we assign IP addresses to our virtual machines or our resources. There are two ways. Either you can assign the IP addresses statically, means you will choose what IP address, which machine will have what IP addresses, or you can use the dynamic method of assigning the IP address, means Azure will assign IP address on your behalf. Now that we have got the info about the virtual network in Azure, let's get ourselves into action and let's create virtual networks, subnets, and a virtual machine, and we will be assigning an IP address from our subnet. Before creating the virtual network, you should know what address spaces you have already used. So I have this four virtual networks. If you'll see, if you click on the first virtual network and you click on address spaces, you can see I have utilized this address space for this particular virtual network. So I cannot use this again for creating new virtual network, as that will be overlap. So I cannot use 10.1.0.0/16 for another virtual network. I cannot use 10.2.0.0/16, and similarly I cannot use 10.0.0.0/24 and 192.168.0.0/16. So we will be creating a virtual network, and I'll be using address space of class B private IP address 172.16.0.0/16. So let's see how can we create a virtual network. For creating virtual networks, just search for virtual networks and click on create, and you can assign the required fields. The subscription is required, the resource group is required. You can create a new one if you want. For this demo, we'll be creating a new resource group. So just click on create new and assign a name to it. I'll be assigning VNet demo. Let's give a name to our virtual network, VNet for marketing department, and you have to provide the region. Let's select the region Central India, and on the next tab you have to provide the IP address range. See, if you are not providing the IP address range, Azure will by default will create the next IP address range available. So let's delete this, and we will be providing our own range, that is 0.0/16. Next we'll have to create a subnet. Let's create the subnet. Let's give it the name mkt01 and 172.16.0.0/24 and add. Let's add one more subnet, mkt02 172.16.1.0/24. So now we have two subnets, 172.16.0.0 and 172.16.1.0. Now you can click on review and create, and the VNet will be created. So the deployment is completed. Now if you'll go to your VNet virtual networks, you can see we have VNet for MKT, and if you click on it, you can see two subnets. The address space we are using 172.16.0.0. This is the address space, and if I'll click on subnets, I can see we have two subnets. Now we can use this subnet and assign these IP addresses in this subnet to our resources. If you'll see here, we only have 251 available IPs. 4 IPs are reserved by Azure. One is the network address, and rest they have reserved it for gateway and all. So we will only get 251 IP for per subnet. Now let's create a virtual NIC, and here I can create a network interface. So let's create here network interface. Resource group will be VNet demo. Name you can give whatever you want, VNet or VM01. Central India virtual network is already selected for this particular resource group, that is VNet for marketing. You can change the subnet if you want. I'll go with 172.16.0.0, and here you can see the private IP address assignment. Means how you want your IP address to get assigned. Do you want a static IP address or you want a dynamic IP address? I'll be selecting dynamic for this demo, and you can click on review and create. Now we have a virtual network, two subnets and one network interface. Now I'll be attaching this interface to a virtual machine. Now if you'll see, I have a VM in resource group that I just created, and if you see the status of this VM is stopped. So now I have one extra VNet. If you go to networking settings of this VM, you can see the VM01403 is attached to it. We have a network interface that we created with the name VM01. So what I'm doing here, I will be attaching that network interface to this virtual machine. So from here you can attach a network interface, and you can select the available network interface that we created in last step. Let's click on OK, and now if you'll see, you will be getting two network interfaces here. As you can see, we have VM01403 that was created by Azure while creating the VM, and we have VM01 that was created by us. I hope you have got some value from this video. Thank you for watching.